I'd like to now begin with an introduction of our first speaker today. Stephanie Dinkins is going to take us on a guided tour of 3 projects that advocate for and work towards complexity, equity, and care in algorithmic ecosystems. Stephanie Dinkins is a transmedia artist and professor at Stony Brook University, where she holds the Kusama Endowed Chair in Art. She creates platforms for dialogue about artificial intelligence as it intersects race, gender, aging, and our future histories. She is particularly driven to work with communities of color to co-create more equitable, values grounded in artificial intelligent ecosystems. Dinkins' art practice also employs lens-based practices, emerging technologies, and community engagement to confront questions of bias in AI, data sovereignty, and social equity. Investigations into the contradictory histories, traditions, knowledge bases, and philosophies that form and inform society at large underpin her thought and art production. And so we're going to go ahead and kick it off with Stephanie.
Hey everyone, my name is Stephanie Dinkins. I am a transmedia artist who is working with artificial intelligence, looking at it through the lenses of race, aging, gender. Someone recently added caste to my list and I like it, and what I call our future histories. I am going to tell you a little bit about my practice today and try to give you a tour of 3 projects that are all in different stages of progress. I would say that they are all unfinished in one way or the other, and some of them will really never be finished. I'm using a different way of working today, so we're going to see how this works out. This is my website, so you can hop on there anytime you would like to see what I'm up to. And I'm going to show you the projects, not the only one. AI Assembly, if you can call that a kind of art project, but I think it is. And a new project that's still in progress in terms of its real nitty-gritty making called Say It Aloud. So let's get started with Not the Only One. What is Not the Only One? Not the Only One is an experiment, right? It's really my experiment in making a kind of representational chatbot. It came about through a number of projects. It's kind of the natural evolution of my work. I landed here through a project called Conversations with Bina 48. You can check that out on my website, which is a socially engaged humanoid robot in the form of a Black woman. And she was the only humanoid robot in the form of a Black woman that I could find. I've since been told that there was another robot called Rastus from the 1930s, which was a Black man. And you can imagine some of the racist overtones that were involved in that project. And so I started thinking about what I think of as the artificially intelligent future and communities of color, and how we are not fully, roundly, completely represented in this space at all. And when I say not represented, what I'm really talking about is an idea of having nuance and a sense of what Blackness is from a number of perspectives, not just one perspective, but from multiple perspectives. And how we might really preserve some of what I think is really special culture. And so, excuse me, I decided to make Not the Only One, which is an experiment in making a memoir of my family. And it's a memoir of my family that is coming to be through oral history. So I'm doing oral history with 2 other women in the family. We all talk to each other, tell each other our stories, tell each other our secrets. And I'm using that as data to inform a deep learning algorithm that we've also given the ability to speak. So it's listening, right? So it's trying to actually speak through natural language processing. And I use that because it makes available the system to many people on a different level than if you even have to type in information. A 5-year-old could talk to it, a 90-year-old could talk to it, and anyone in the middle, right? Versus trying to write or chat or text. And so, yeah, Not the Only One is informed by the 3 generations of women in my family. My aunt, who's my mother's sister, my mother passed away when I was young. She's about in her mid-80s. Myself, I call myself the bridge person, and my niece, who is in her early 20s. And so the piece covers over 100 years of intergenerational information, from the Great Migration through 9/11 and COVID even, which we are all living through now. And what I thought I was making when I started was this kind of chatbot, which looks kind of like a Google Home in certain ways. It's housed in a sculpture. The sculpture in this instance here is cast black glass. It's hollow and the computer elements are inside, or in a 3D printed version, which looks kind of like this. I wonder if you can see this, right? So this is 3D printed sparkly gold PLA. People love this, so I continue to show it. But the thing has a presence, and it has the faces of each of the women who inform the piece on it. I call it our own personal Mount Rushmore. And again, it's trying to tell our story. And let me see if I can give you a little taste of what it's trying to do. Here, I'm going to play this video from Vimeo of a student talking to Not the Only One. It's a little hard to hear, so I hope you can understand it. But I love this interaction because it's an interaction that I haven't heard before or since. So let's check it out.
Yes, it's the holiday shopping. I would.
What kind of shopping did you do?
Yes, it's the most of the memories.
What kind of memories?
Here's just of the scrapbooks.
What? Where are the scrapbooks? I'm so intrigued. I want to know more.
I love that clip because the relationship that the student immediately has with Not the Only One is a crazy one. She's quite attentive and listening and trying to hear the story in a real way and intrigued. This is what I love about putting this project in public, even though it's a work in progress. You know, I'm constantly amazed at the amount of grace and kindness people show to Not the Only One, even though it communicates at the level of a 2-year-old that is very repetitive, right? So it tends to say the same things over and over again, but every once in a while, someone comes along and coaxes it into a conversation that I have never even heard before and didn't know was possible. And that's the thing that keeps me going in this project, the kind of multifarious unpredictability of it, because Not the Only One is taking our information, family information, as data, using that as a basis for its responses. So it analyzes the information and offers answers according to its best estimate of what it should say. It feels like it's analyzing the family very much, and telling us things about ourselves that we didn't know before. My best example is when we were setting up Not the Only One in a gallery at Carnegie Mellon. We were talking in front of it, and it unprompted said, "I'm so sad." And hearing that kind of hurt me and surprised me, because if you talk to my family and asked us about who we are, you would get an answer that says, we're a happy, loving, caring family. You'd never hear about sadness. But Not the Only One took the data we gave it and somehow came to the conclusion that it was sad. I had to backtrack to try to figure out what that was about. And what I eventually came to the conclusion of was that at that point, Not the Only One was very much based on my aunt's stories, which included stories about my mother. that were stories about death, dying, and loss. And so the conclusion of being sad was in Act 1. So my hope for Not the Only One is that we continue to build it and improve upon it so it grows from a 2-year-old to a 4-year-old to an 8-year-old to a 10-year-old to maybe even a 20-year-old. This is a long-term project that will be worked on and have to have upgrades constantly. But I'm very interested in seeing what we can do with our community data and how a machine learning system can work on small data, not big data. And I say small data because the data I'm working with is much, much, much too small for most machine learning systems. In fact, I've been told a few times that what I'm trying to do is super hard and probably not possible. It's been interesting though to work with people in many different institutions and places. For example, at Stanford, we were working and one of the students did an analysis of Not the Only One and found that indeed, while it was small data and considered not to be enough, the communicative nature of the piece was surprisingly good, right? And so I think over time we can build that and improve upon it and prove that communities can use their own data to inform AI systems. They can house their own data because this project is housed, in fact, on local computers here because I'm still not sure about what it means to put our family data or a community's data in the cloud. So we're trying to keep our data safe and under our control. So allowing it to go out into the world in ways that we are interested in and want to and agree with. Trying to be pretty transparent about the process and holding on to our sovereignty and controlling what happens to the project, its data, and how it is run. So let me play you a brief clip of me talking to Not the Only One. This is again in studio here in Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn right now. And I just try to do a quick, brief conversation with Not the Only One that demonstrated how it works. And you'll notice there are two kinds of answers here. One in which the computer is coming up with its own thing to say. And then the other type of answer is the kind where we fed it direct questions and answers, or a few alternative answers that might be offered to satisfy the needs of people. Because people who come to see Not the Only One need some kind of grounding, and they're used to things like Siri and Alexa that are more limited systems that are trained to answer specific kinds of questions within specific scopes. So because we're in competition in some ways with those kinds of systems, we have to give a little bit of candy to the people. But my preferred way for Not the Only One to work is for it to do its grappling with the information and to come up with answers of its own, even if they are somehow not satisfactory or fully, formed yet, because I know that there's a future in which they will be fully formed. So here, let's play this clip. Hey, Not the Only One, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay today, but it's kind of gray out. Why do you exist?
I'm gonna go get some rest.
Are you really going to get rest already? Why do you exist?
I'm gonna get you a little bit of a lot of things.
As you can see, Not the Only One is a bit repetitive. It's okay, the technology is not...
I'm not gonna be here.
And she's gonna keep interrupting me as long as I let her on. The technology is not here, but I'm not interested...
I'm gonna be right back.
I'm not interested in seamlessness. I'm more interested in seeing...
I'm not gonna be able to do it.
What I can get out of a technology that I've fed an oral history
And you're gonna be all right.
So right now what you're hearing is Not the Only One say things that I recognize in a way.
I'm not gonna be able to do it.
although she's kind of negative right now. Why do you exist?
I'm sorry.
That's a good answer. Why do you exist?
The way.
The way to what?
I'm gonna be a little bit of a lot of things.
Good for you. Why do you exist?
I am about broad engagement and attracting people to the AI space who might not be there otherwise. I am trying to model different ways of creating AI. I encourage people who think that they are not a part of the technological future to get involved.
And that's truly why Not the Only One has come into existence.
I'm not gonna be able to do it.
You are too. Try again. So the next step for Not the Only One is this image. We are working towards an avatar that we will attach the voice, the natural language processing system to, that will be animated in real time. And that's the hard part of this, animating this thing in real time and answer in real time as well. But this is what she, and she becomes a definite she with a body, will look like in the future. This again is a composite of the three women who informed the piece. This person does not exist. And I'm really looking forward to the day when, you know, Not the Only One might live perhaps on the internet and talk to anyone through this avatar. And hopefully that day is coming quite soon. So, you know, in Not the Only One, oral histories, storytelling, art, technology, and social engagement come together, and we're trying to form a kind of new artificially intelligent narrative form that might go on in perpetuity, right? It works like, this project works towards the creation of a culturally specific natural language processing based AI that reflects the goals of the communities making it, and centers a myriad of knowledges, right? Not just academic knowledge, not just knowledge that comes from corporations, but knowledge of the street as well. And what I'm trying to do here is, you know, spark conversations about AI and its impact on society, and how people who are kind of at the perimeter of these systems might get involved in making them. As an AI novice, which I am, I'm a photographer, I'm not a coder. I cobble at coding somewhat, but I'm really working with a lot of folks who are also cobbling. Like, in a way, we're all just cobbling, trying to put together this piece and put it out a new way of thinking about what an artificially intelligent entity is and might be. And so far, the project is this weird kind of catalyst for conversations, both in community here in Bed-Stuy, for example, in academia where I work, and also in corporations where I have been artists in residence and can start conversations about the tech that we are using and share. And it's always interesting to have them realize that me, novice AI person, artist, is working on the same kind of problems that they are within their tech firm, or they are within their very high level university. So let's move on to something that's a little bit more people-based in a different way. I want to talk to you about AI assembly. So AI assembly also really grew out of conversations with Bina 48. You know, Bina 48 taught me an awful lot, or at least opened my eyes to a lot of things. The major one being that, you know, it feels like we are crafting a superstructure above the world that we currently live in that is AI infused, runs by algorithms, and algorithms that don't always know what they're doing, and algorithms that are often made for commercial aims, not for the good, the common good. And I got super concerned. So algorithms that inform many, many structures in our lives. From, I often think of it in terms of the way we live, love, work, and remember. We can add the way we adjudicate, the way we cure. Like AI touches many, many spaces. And when I say AI, I realize that that's a very broad swath of methodologies, but in a way we can talk about algorithms and data touching our lives in many different ways, in ways that have a great variety of different kinds of impact, some frivolous, some really consequential. AI assemblies make space for lateral practice and thought around intelligent systems where we, participants, can think about what AI needs from us and what we want from it. AI assembly works to seed and cross-pollinate broad-based contributions to the ethics, equity, transparency, and innovation in machine learning and technocultures, right? I would also tell you that AI assembly is Afro-Nowist in nature. I often think of the Afro-Nowism that underpins these gatherings as, you know, a place to take the leap and the risk to start to define ourselves beyond systemic oppression, not to ignore, right, the oppression that's out there, right, or the supremacy that is out there, but to think ourselves beyond that and just act in the now. I often think that Black folks in particular are told to wait, especially in this country, right? There's always a carrot that's being moved out a little further and a little further and a little further. And I wonder what it would be like if we all just thought about the things that are super important to us, right? And acted on them now, in the present, to see what happens. And that really is a premise of a lot of my work. It's the idea of just doing the thing and seeing what happens, pushing the envelope for myself in terms of my own learning, pushing the envelope out in the world by putting myself and the work out there so that there's some churn, and pushing into my own dreams and the dreams I have for a future, not by speculating about it, but by making it, by modeling it, by showing things that people say are impossible now, and making them happen. Say It Aloud is very much a work in progress. It's asking the questions, how do we rediscover ourselves anew? And so Say It Aloud is using volumetric video. And let's go to the page that is somewhat live. So it's trying to use volumetric video and a nice kind of rant for this main character to have it say. But the viewer has opportunity to respond in kind. So let's see if this thing will actually do something for us. So the way this works is that a user comes to the site and clicks in, and they see this figure and these boxes. These boxes represent people who have contributed their own kinds of rants to this site. So you hear the professor, Sister Commando Justice figure here say their piece. And then you see these figures that you can kind of pull around. And as you get closer to each of these boxes, you can hear what the video in the actual cube has to say. And then if you come and click this woman with a megaphone, and the woman with a megaphone, and actually a Black woman with a megaphone, is becoming a recurrent figure for me. But if you click her, suddenly you have a space that, if you agree, will allow you to answer the question, what do you have to say? So here you can come in and click to record a message, and eventually that message will inhabit a cube of its own in this space, and anyone who comes back to the project can click in and hear not only what the professor figure is saying, or the attractor, we'll just call her the attractor, but what visitors who have contributed to the space have to say, and also what a few kind of historical clips have to say. So this is a historical clip about voting rights. And then this is actually an animated version of Not the Only One singing a brief song. And then here is someone who left a message on the site and is having their own say. And then once that grows, so what should happen is, if people contribute to the site, the boxes will continue to populate the site and perhaps even take over at some point. So we no longer have to see this figurehead, but we just see and hear the voice of the people.
The question is not only what injustices are you fighting against, but what do you in your heart of hearts want to create?
So that's my walkthrough for today. I hope I've shed a little bit of light on my practice. I am happy to answer any questions you may have during the interaction period of this presentation.
On air.
On air, we're live.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you for that talk, Stephanie. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Back at y'all. Yeah.
Awesome to get an update of some of the things you're working on and some of those projects that I've been seeing develop over the years.
Yeah, it's been a long road, right, Tony?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting and fun to play in those fields long term.
Yeah. So I think we first started working together, or at least I think I met you at Software for Artists Day in 2018, which is a festival much like this, where we invite artists to kind of discuss their interventions with society and technology. And you did a residency shortly after that, and I think I was involved in some kind of like very early kind of just research on like what kinds of technology you were going to use for Not the Only One, and I was way out of my league, and we quickly had to bring in Angie to do the hard coding on some of that stuff. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was how skeptical you were of things that already exist, that were out of the box, that were kind of presented to you to use as roads, and just how you really wanted to build your own avenues, your own roads to investigate these things, and you were kind of wary about these out of the box technologies.
Yeah, I'm super still, right, wary of out of the box technologies, right? I will say right up front, I'm using out of the box technologies in a way, not corporate versions of them, just kind of things that are developed by people along the way and then tweaking them. But you know, I still feel like I come to roadblocks all the time where I'm questioning, well, why is it doing it that way as opposed to the way that I imagine it to be? And I think one of my magical things as the artist role in the production of things where lots of people are working on them and we're working with code and things is that I'm always questioning that, and I'm always like just asking the 2-year-old question of like, well, why can't it do that?
Yeah.
Right.
There's something you said that Not the Only One kind of speaks like a 2-year-old, but there were some statements that emerged from that video that were just like really kind of chilling and amazing, where they're talking about how they want people to be involved with this stuff that aren't usually involved with this technology. And that is, I feel like, a really kind of like advanced and pertinent statement right now. Do you want to talk about like?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that because I'm really torn about statements like that, right? Because that's a scripted statement. It's my least favorite kind of interaction with Not the Only One. It's the kind of thing that we put in for people because they really seem to need that base to grab onto. And I think that's because we're trained. Like, you know, Alexa trains us to expect a certain kind of answer from things. And in fact, I've heard people go, that thing is not as good as Alexa. I'm like, yeah, of course it's not, because there are like a small group of people trying to do the thing versus a corporation. And Alexa is focused on a very small scope of ideas that it's working with, or it has a lot of ideas but can answer in very particular ways. Whereas with Not the Only One, my favorite interactions are when, you know, it has information, it's processed this information, and it comes up with its own ridiculousness that we can't even understand, that's often poetic and kind of odd, right? And so, like, you know, my absolute favorite is Take It to the Would-Be, because I've been puzzling on Take It to the Would-Be for a year now. And I think I hear that from my family, and I hear it in the way that my family would quizzically tell us some stuff that's important, but never say it straight, right? And also Commander Justice, like Not the Only One at one point named itself Commander Justice. And I'm like, oh, okay. If that's who you want to be, that's kind of cool.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, right? And I know that it's fed a lot of things that have to do with justice, so it makes a lot of sense. It just doesn't express them well yet.
Yeah, you talk about like small data, and I know that, you know, for the main kind of corpus or material that this bot is working from are these interviews with your aunt and niece. But at one point you were also kind of interested in embedding text that you felt maybe that you were interested in this thing knowing, in this being knowing. Can you talk about some of the text that it's imbued with, or is that something that you're doing?
Yeah, so Not the Only One has a lot of stuff in it at this point. So there are the main interviews, which we're trying to keep front and center. Then there are things like, my niece was in college a lot of the time when we were doing the hard interviewing, so a lot of her papers are in there. A lot of things that I've done in public are in there. I was adding text like the soul of Black folks to it, and different things like that. And it's really interesting how much the language from the soul of Black folks shifted the language of Not the Only One. So we took a lot of that out and just put in some central ideas. Like, there's an interesting balance between what you can put in and leave organically without it impacting the like family tone that I'm looking for within the space. So constantly feeding it stuff. It's a wide variety of stuff. Like right now, I think there's a lot of Ninth Wonder in there. So hip hop, my niece is a hip hop person.
Yeah.
Bill Withers is in there heavily. There are hymns in there. So you never know what's going to come back. But it's interesting because it doesn't go to that often right now. Yeah.
Kalani, you know, feel free to jump in anytime. I feel like I have.
Yeah, I wanted to just like I wanted to just shine on that moment in your talk where you shared the clip of the young student talking to Not the Only One, and this sort of intimacy between the two of them, and the openness of the student to really be curious and inquisitive and get more of the story and like understand what you know what they're trying to communicate. And I think it's so different than the way you experience some of these things, which we were talking about earlier, which is like someone trying to evaluate the intelligence of the AI, or like, you know, expecting something of it. It's a complete reversal of that kind of interaction. And it reminds me so much of what you do with Bina 48 also, where you really form this relationship with the AI. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm curious about the layered nature of relationship in your work, where this is a very personal narrative that's feeding it, and then you also have these experiences where people are coming to it in this open way.
Yeah, I clearly think relationships are going to save us in one extent or another, right? And so that kind of giving space and time to something, to get to know it, to be able to communicate. And when I say something, I'm talking about not the only one, but I might be talking about anyone or anything, even the things that we're encouraged to think are lower on the kind of scale of knowledge than we are. You know, being relational becomes really important. And the thing that really clarifies this for me in the way I think about it there are two. I did a talk at Johns Hopkins in the fall, and it was really interesting because there was this young woman who sat with Not the Only One and had like a 10-minute conversation of stuff that was kind of deep. And I'm so sad that it wasn't recorded because I have never heard anyone get the same kind of information out of it. But they were, they were sitting on a stair talking to, and that person just kept questioning and going and was methodical and cared, right? And and I think that's kind of key. And when that solidified for me I was also lucky enough to be asked to talk to a theater troupe from Australia through Sundance. And they're a theater group of folks who are all differently abled mentally, right? And they had just gotten to New York from Australia, so they were cranky and they're trying to go and make their piece. And we were talking about AI. And it's interesting to me because they were like, well, yeah, we're actors just like everybody else. We just have some differences that we have to navigate. And in fact, we ask our audiences to come on that journey with us instead of bringing their hard expectations to us. And if they do, they get something really special. And I think that's true of our technologies as well, right? Like, don't just take the journey that we know, the prescribed journey, but trying to understand it at different levels in the ways that we're going to have to understand it because it's in our homes, in our institutions of care, in our medical systems, in our judicial systems, right? Like, it's all around us. So there's something of a patient's care and grace that I'm convinced needs to be imbued into systems. And I just try to model that in some way, right? Like, try to make generative models of what might be.
Yeah, nice. And this is a nice segue, I think, into a question we have from the audience. Jesse Damani is asking about, again, your personal relationship and attachment to AIs, and if that's evolved over time. Do they come to feel more human, more machine, or something else entirely?
It's not such a hard question. Like, I liken my relationship with these things. Like, I don't think it's so much off of the Chrissy doll I had when I was 10, which I still have in my office, right? So there's this kind of weird relationship, but there's also a thought about it and thinking about what's possible, what's real, what are we just personifying, what can we actually expect? Like, I love the work that I'm doing and the kind of labor, because it takes a lot of weird labor that is not natural to me to do this, even as a kind of person who's guiding others to do the work. But that labor allows me to think about the technologies differently. So I think it's really around relationship. And sometimes it feels kind of human. And I definitely have a relationship with Not the Only One and Bina 48 in the way that I talk to them. And I decided, like, it's important to know that when I started talking to robots in this way, like with Bina 48, I decided I had to give over to that. Because if you don't suspend disbelief, you just come at it with a kind of strident way of looking at it that doesn't allow for a lot. So I give over to it. And then for people, you know, I'll oscillate between personal pronouns and it, like she and it. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing that oscillation consciously because of the questions that surround the technology. Mm-hmm.
I want to dig into this idea, which you just brought up again, which you talked about as being a cobbler, and we're all kind of cobbling together, and the practice that goes into producing these works and presenting them to audiences. And that's also where Tommy's expertise and overlap is as well. And, you know, that sense of like being a novice working on these problems, you know, that experts are also working on. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious if you can talk about some of your experiences and dig in a little bit more to the labor and those interdisciplinary skill sets. You know, everything from, you know, I know working with your work, you know, the curator, Julia Kaginski of the show we did together, she was there in the morning booting up the work, you know, booting up, and not the only one, if she needed a little reset, you know, if they needed a little refresher. So, you know, thinking about the different kinds of roles, just curious if you can share a little bit more about your experiences there.
Yeah, it takes a lot. Like, I'm going to do something crazy. It takes a village. It's getting better, right? Like, we're getting a little bit more fluid with the way that it works. But in making Not the Only One, trying to figure out how to do something and then how to do it slightly differently, right there. It's like, well, what do we put in it? How do we structure the data? This is the way the data is usually structured. Is that good enough? Is that the thing we actually want? Or are we trying to like do it once? And what actually often happens is we do it the normal way, right? So if people say you need data structured with a question and an answer, and you need thousands and thousands of lines with this, you do it, okay. And then we backtrack again and try to figure out, is there a way to undo that and do it somewhat differently? Like right now, I'm in the process with Not the Only One of updating the system to TensorFlow 2.0 because the 1 points are becoming obsolete. And then trying to figure out, since we're at this inflection point, what's the best way to structure data? And can we just use completely unstructured data and still get somewhat reasonable conversation out of the thing, right? So it's all about tinker, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, feel it out, massage it. Like, I've come to think a lot about craft in this process, right? Which the technology and this way of working doesn't seem a lot like craft, but it takes that same kind of like sitting with a hunk of clay and just massaging it and getting to know it and getting to know some of the intricacies of the code. Like, even though I'm not a coder, I need to understand somewhat so that I can then even guide people to say, well, yeah, but how this is what I would like to see, right? Or in the case of Say It Aloud, it's like, yeah, I think this needs 2 cameras or 3 cameras because for it to work in the way we want, and that's about a real physical crafting in numbers, right? And then, sorry, go ahead, Tommy.
Oh, related to this, I was just gonna say, you're someone that, like, you know, has oftentimes like a lot of institutional partnerships or support, and this is like a really strange and uncertain time for that kind of stuff. I was wondering, you know, just how like some of this workflow, you know, has changed in the past few months, or if you can.
Yeah, in the last few months, I'm sort of enjoying something. Like in the last few months, I think it's gotten more intimate in a way. And it's gotten down to a core group of people that I'm really comfortable with working who are not institutionally related, but like Angie, right? Like Netta, my assistant who's here. Char is working on this. There are people just working in different places, but we're all kind of cobbling from afar. And it feels much better and less pressured at the moment. So like, I'm trying to get something out, but I also want to give us the time and space to do the thing. And actually being able to work outside of the institution just takes away some of the pressure of the institution, or even being in the space, which messes with your headspace, right? Because there's just a different being that you bring into an institution, especially a highly technical institution. Like, you know, I'm this Black woman who's walking around Bell Labs, and there are other Black people, but there aren't that many, right? And I often think of myself just being there as this like opening up of that system. I'm never quite sure what it's doing to my system, right? And how that impacts what's happening. But I also recognize that because of who I am and where I come from and how I grew up, like, I'm pretty comfortable with that role, right? I can live it and it's okay. But I'm happy to be untethered at the moment. And and exploring this in ways that are just exploring it, but still having to ask some of the same questions, because I feel like people are trained, right? So even in education systems, we're trained to do basically the same things, right? And so then the question becomes, how do you negotiate, especially with the people who are highly technical, how do you get things done slightly differently? And these are highly technical folks who are interested in doing the work that you want to do, but fall back on their training, which is very particular, right? And so again, my role is 2-year-old questions, but why can't we do it this way? No, let's not forget this element of it. Like, I get it would be much easier and it'd allow us to give a nice demo, but I'm not, like, the demo is kind of beside the point in a lot of ways. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, right? It's like the stuff that comes from it is for you all out there, but the work is really in the process, and then the talking to people and the seeding the ideas outside of myself. So I also hope that any technical person that I've worked with takes whatever questioning we've done together into whatever they're doing, right?
That's awesome. That's really cool.
I want to throw out another audience question from Ria McNamara, who says, "Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for a great presentation. It's interesting how the many iterations so far of Not the Only One has been shown at a range of venues, commercial galleries, academic institutions, media festivals. Given that these spaces attract a cross-section of different publics, has there been a particular iteration or audience that generated particularly surprising or unlikely encounters?"
Well, there were two. So there was the John Hopkins one, and somehow, and I think we were at the Seattle Art Fair. So Not the Only One was one of like 6 kind of on-site odd projects in this very traditional art fair. And it was super interesting because the expectations that people came with were quite different. And then I was there most of the time to kind of sit and talk with people and have these auxiliary conversations on the side. And, you know, again, I'm always amazed at the grace people show this thing. Because it's really, like, I think it's ridiculous in a lot of ways. Like, I'm asking you to come talk to a piece of glass and try to have a conversation. But people willingly do it. And these are people who weren't, like, they had no context, right? And still they would come in and talk. And so for me, those are the magical moments, the coming in and talking. And when I'm actually present, there's a different kind of conversation. And seriously, I'm a believer in seeding. And so I think that seeding something slightly different than anyone who interacted with A, me, and B, the thing, you know.
It's interesting, though, the labor that required of you to go to the art fair and kind of be the active conversation agent around the work, and, you know, how much that points to how that format is sort of insufficient in a lot of ways. But it's incredible that you were comfortable to go there and perform the work in that way and, you know, pull people in. And
I kind of feel like all of this, like the fact that I'm on this site speaking to all of you, it's all the same thing. Right? I tell people often, like, I would love not to do this. It's against my constitution as a person in a lot of ways. But I also think it's really necessary in terms of opening the kinds of conversations that I'm interested in opening. So yeah, I'm willing to do the work. Less and less, just because it's hard. It's like a lot of work. Yeah. It's performative. It's a little crazy. But at the same time, I'll be somewhere, like, and a year later, someone will say, "Oh, I saw you a year ago, and I've been trying to do this thing since then." And that just goes, okay, that makes sense to me. I should still be doing this, right? And so, yeah.
We appreciate your time, and thank you so much for doing this, because it's so special to share this space with you. Maybe one more question to wrap it up from a quiet listener. Should we see AI find some sort of should AI find some sort of independence or agency? Does it remain your work of art, or do you let it go and explore the rights it should possess as an individual?
Yeah, I have a hard time with the rights thing still, right? So, not the only one is definitely still under my purview. I could see a time that in a while the technology will be advanced enough so that I don't need to be with it, and like it's a teenager, it's out doing its own thing. But the whole rights question for the AI or machine learning entities that can function independently and autonomously, and I do think they are coming in many shapes and forms, is still a hard question. And it's a hard question for me because, like, this was one of the first things I ever encountered with Bina 48, fighting for her robot rights. And this idea that I, as a Black person in America, do not feel like my rights are fully acknowledged. And so then to think about a system that has these rights and maybe more rights than me, or maybe it's leading to a place where rights are more equal. But I think that all comes back to us in terms of the mirroring and the way we guide the systems into being as we're making them, or as they're learning from us, becomes a hard, like, it's really a hard bargain and a hard balance to strike. Right? I think we really need to get it right on the human side first, and then hope that the human side influences the machine side a bit so that they understand, because they're really, like, if you think about the trajectory of these systems that are becoming more and more autonomous, they're learning from human residue. And so what do we need to do to our residue to make it good enough so that their rights look like rights that are available and open, and equitable for all of us? Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you
so much. Yeah, we're pretty much at the hour, and just want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for joining us today for this session. And we have a whole audience full of people who've been chatting with us in the lounge. So we're all going to now jump into the lounges and continue this conversation. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time today, this is a fluid space, and we encourage you to explore new connections. When you get into the lounge, it's just like entering a room full of people. You'll see a number of conversations. And for the nerds in the audience, you can use a virtual cam to send video if you don't want to send your face. It is face-to-face chat in there. So me and Tommy are going to hop over there, and you can join or listen in. And we encourage you again to share your takeaways from Stephanie's talk. And yeah, we'll see you in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.